Hey guys, Infidel1258 here. Today we're going to get into a fun video covering some of the worst cards in the game. We've covered recently a lot of the better cards, especially some of the must-haves from the Modern League. That's really important stuff, but it's also kind of fun to look at which ones are most overrated or most just stay away from them type thing. And this idea came to me from watching somebody on YouTube named Version1. He's a Time and Attention member, first of all, and second of all, he's a YouTube content creator who does a great job. So check him out, Version1 on YouTube. And so before I get into it though, I've got 5 that I want to share with you that I think are the worst from the wild format. And I don't have them in a particular order exactly, but kind of they're in order too. So we can unpack that as we go through them. I've got them queued up. We'll look at their abilities. We'll talk in depth about each of them and why I would say that they are in my list of the worst cards from the wild format. These are totally excluding modern cards. There will be no Chaos Legion, no Untamed, no Dice, and no new reward cards. It's just wild, old cards, okay? And before I get into that too, I want to explain one important factor that not everybody understands about games like this, about games where you have a certain budget. Like you're given X amount of mana every time you fight a match in this game. That's your budget. And so when you come to a game, you have to decide whether you're going to play six monsters that are maybe perhaps lower in mana, or 1 or 2 monsters that are really big in mana. That's often the case with this game. That's your budget, and that's really important to understand because that begins to flavor what cards can supersede others, which ones are become must-have and which ones you can disregard, because sometimes big mana monsters can't fit in a match. That's one thing that we have to think about as we rank cards like this. And another thing we have to think about when we're ranking what are the absolute worst ones is that sometimes the price of a bad card is relatively low. And while I don't think I think it's quite bad, that the relatively low price takes some heat off of it. We don't need to, pile on and talk about how terrible Rusty Android is. That's one of the cards I like least in this game. But it's relatively inexpensive and nobody buys it, nobody plays with it for the most part. And so, it doesn't need a place in this video. And so we're going to talk about some of the most expensive cards, because at the end of the day, those are the ones that really need to move the needle in a dramatic way. Otherwise, they aren't worth it. Otherwise, you shouldn't buy them. And that's what we're getting at here. Which are the 5 cards that aren't worth it in the wild format? Okay, so without further ado, my name is Dwayne Cunningham, and I go by Infidel1258, and on the channel we cover Splinterlands all day, every day, because it's changed my life. Okay. So, top 5 cards to stay away from. And again, remember, these aren't bad cards exactly. It's just a combination of where they fit because of their mana, or their abilities, or their price. That confluence of factors is leading me to say these are the 5 cards I wouldn't consider. And we'll get into each of them. The first one, Jinh Low. It's probably a card you don't even know about. Most of you won't even have ever seen because it's that rare. It's an old promo card, and as you can see from the frame, it's an alpha promo card. So this is way before most of us were present, even before I was present in this game. And it's perhaps rightly, very expensive because it is so exceedingly rare. And from a collectible standpoint, it's interesting. But I don't play this game strictly I'm not a collector first. I'm a player first with a vision to generate revenue from this amazing blockchain-based video game. So I'm not looking to have a complete collection. I'm not looking to have all max level monsters. I'm not looking to have, every alpha, every beta, even when they're duplicates. Some people probably do want those things. And for you, cards like this might be really interesting because it's such a rarity. But just looking at, first of all, what it's doing, and second of all, the cost of that, I can't justify it. And I mean, it's got a simple enough kit for 1 mana, which is really great. Of course, that's a very interesting mana point, mana cost. It's going to kick out 1 damage, and then if you're playing with cards like this, you probably have a Delwyn Dragon Scale, so that probably makes 2 magic damage at a 1 mana cost, which is really, really exceptional. Anytime you can get same amount of damage as you have mana cost, so if you're doing 1 damage for 1 mana, that's usually very good. That's kind of for me, a line in the sand where you become You go from mediocre to excellent if you're putting out that much damage. And so this absolutely is a good card. And I like the art, and it's cool from a collectible standpoint. But even at the highest levels, is only kicking out 2 damage. And even if you have this card and you have Delwyn, which by the way is not what I don't want to, any of these cards would be good if you drop, you know, the right summoner with them. I'm talking about individually set apart from other amazing decks. You know, this card alone, if you were trying to build a deck today to try and really grow and improve the value, a card like these 5 cards and this one specifically is not where you're at. You need to invest value in a different type of way where you're going to extract more value by acquiring further more and more assets. So it's like 20 different cards at high levels versus 1 card at a low level. That's really kind of cool and collectible. Yeah, 2 magic damage is great for 1 level. And if you did have Delwyn, 3 is crazy. That's really, really amazing. And sneak with the magic is actually quite interesting. You've heard me criticize sneak with archery, which is kind of more common these days. I still criticize sneak archery because, first of all, archery can miss, and second of all, armor on the back line can prevent that from being meaningful. But magic on a sneak is actually really effective. But here's the thing. It's still a relatively low hit point, easy opportunity monster. There's no armor. The speed is relatively slow. And there are cards in the game that you could have that would mirror something like this. This is a dragon, and you could buy the goblin, what's it called? I think it's called the goblin. We'll look at it in a second. It's from the Earth Splinter. It's a magic monster, and it does sneak attack magic. And so I just, you know, look at this price, $4,000 per BCX, and it's in alpha, but that's there was no beta of this. So I'm not cherry picking here. I'm showing you the only copy of the Jinh Low. If there was a beta, it would probably be cheaper. We would look at that, but you know, for this cost, it's just absolutely, it's a collectible. This is something entirely different. This is not a good card for building a deck that's going to be a real winner. If you have such an amazing deck that this is all you can do to move the needle, then you're in a totally different bracket and a totally different conversation than the average person in this game. This card is for none of us, not even me. I would never spend 30 grand on this card because it wouldn't do enough to justify that. I could buy like, I think 5 or 6 Jodens for that price. So no to Jinh Low. And it doesn't mean it's a bad card. It's an excellent card. It's got cool artwork. It's a really interesting collectible card. Super rare because of both alpha and promo. I don't know how many copies, but we could check that. I can see right here. We're circulating. There's only 95 copies circulating on the regular and only 43 copies circulating on the gold foil. That is crazy. That's just crazy. So from a collectible, I get it. But from a, you know, moving the needle on the game, building a playable deck, if this is what you need to improve your deck is almost perfect. And so for the average person, I wouldn't even, this is just totally out of the conversation. That's card number 1, Jinh Low. Card number 2. Oh, before we move on though, I want to look at that. I want to show you that magic monster from the green because he's a beta. He's far cheaper. There he is, Goblin Sorcerer. And so look, if you wanted a dragon monster that did magic damage, that did you know, relatively low mana cost, that did a sneak attack play, this card right here, yes, it's 3 mana, the other one's 1 mana, but this one's, you could get 1 copy for $5 instead of 1 copy for $4,000. So it's so insane how expensive Jinh Low is, and I get it, but no, that's definitely card number 1. Card number 2, Minotaur Warlord. This is one you perhaps have seen. It is also a promo card. It is far more common because it's a more modern promo card. It's a good card, just like the Jinh Low. It's a good card. but it's got its limitations. We'll discuss the benefits and the limitations here now. So the Minotaur Warlord is obviously an Earth Splinter card. It's clearly a tank type of a monster, and you're primarily going to play something like this. You know what, in like a medium mana match, like a 30-40 mana match, where you could do, you know, some supports, because it doesn't have any heal, so you're going to want to have a heal or two in the back. Maybe you're going to want to drop some armor on it, so you're going to need like, you know, 40 mana match to use something like this effectively. Or in those matches where you have melee from any position, maybe you put this in the back line because it's going to have, or the second position because it's going to have return fire and blast that could potentially be thrown back at your opponent from the second position if they are using blast themselves. And because of the attack from anywhere in that setting, you could still use it there. But see, it doesn't have reach. That's my first criticism. My first criticism, it doesn't have shield, it doesn't have armor, it doesn't have void, it doesn't have void armor, it doesn't have thorns, it doesn't have self-heal, it doesn't have any of the perseverance abilities that I really like to see in the best tanks of this game. And it's not even very fast, so it's very mediocre speed. In fact, you might even say slow. 3 is, once you throw a nerf on this, if they drop 1 slow, you're down to 2, and that is not okay. Unless it's reverse speed, in which case it's okay. But 3 speed is not adequate. Usually you're going to be punching second, and if you're punching second, you're going to die. Unless you have sustain, which this has none of it. If it had void, if it had armor, if it had self-heal, you know, if it had immunity, maybe some of those things could make this really interesting. But it lacks that perseverance, that that some sort of resilience that would make it a tank that could sustain itself or be sustained. And so I feel this would be too easily deleted. And I had copies of this long ago when I sold them because I felt the way I feel now, which is that it's interesting. It's quite powerful in the right context, but it's very niche in that if I wanted to have it in those melee from any position, I would like it at that sort of situation, because the blast and the 5 damage at the highest levels or 4 at lower levels, that could be very interesting. Blast from a melee perspective, but these feel very unusual. And when you're looking at a kit of any monster, it's interesting to ask yourself, how would those abilities play together? Magic Reflect and Return Fire work really well together. From a tank, it makes a lot of sense because your tank is usually going to be the target of magic and archery. So it's great that he's going to send that back. Here's the problem. He has 10 hit points at that level and 12 at the highest. 12 is not high enough for something that lacks void, for something that lacks armor. Even if you had triple heal, it just is not going to self-sustain itself even past the first round. Triple heals it behind this thing. And unless your heals were perfectly positioned where your opponent fired, you healed, your opponent fired, you healed, that would be the luck you would require to let this thing get through the first round of a very heavy hitting magic team or very heavy hitting archery team, or if your opponent focus fires the first position, this thing goes down. And so I feel those are interesting little tack-ons, but they're not going to stick, or the card's not going to stick around long enough for that to be a deciding factor for the game. And the card not sticking around for an 8 mana cost is unacceptable. And so it's too expensive from a mana standpoint for most situations. For me to call it a reliable main tank, it lacks resiliency, so I can't really call it a main tank. It has some niche use because of the blast damage and the high damage output, but then if you're putting it in the back line, the Magic Reflect and Return Fire become less relevant. And so what are those abilities even doing? They're not now, maybe they're not even relevant, and maybe they're not even part of what I'm using it for. And so all that comes to the table, and you see $118 per BCX, and you think, you know, that would be about $1,500 to get 11 copies of it, right? Because they're not all 118. You know, it's going to be closer to 125, 150 per BCX. You're talking probably $1,500 to get a max copy. And I think that all the things you could do with that is so dramatic. You know, you could the sort of abilities you could pile on with the green team in particular for $1,500 is just obviously too great, and I just don't get it. And and not for this tank. I mean, there's better, cheaper monsters on the green team that would merit even modern ones. Pellicor, I'd rather have the Pellicor Mercenary. I'd rather have Orcs, Stone Splitter Orc, who is far more low hit points, but has more of a unified kit in the Retaliate and Rage. His thing is, if you throw melee at me, you're in trouble, because his speed and his Retaliate are gonna take you out. Grund, of course. Golem, even Flesh Golem is probably more, as expensive, I would think. So 100 and right there. This is an interesting card for 500 bucks, and it's less than maybe a third the price of the one we just looked at. So definitely pass on the Minotaur. Number 3, Chromatic Dragon. Chromatic Dragon is a very, again, just like all the other cards that we're going to talk about today, a really good card. The question is the price versus the value worth it? And would it make a dramatic change to the average deck to the point where you should be considering something like this? And I think this card is interesting. It's good in certain settings, especially in melee and any position type settings, but you can't control that. And I don't like having an expensive card specifically for niche moments. When you're buying cards to fit little niche moments, that means your deck, either you're making a mistake in terms of how you're allocating your resources, or it means that your deck's already at such a great level that you really only have small little patches to repair on the imperfections of your deck. For the average person, that's not their story, and that's why this card falls on my list of top 5, because yes, it is good. It's even an interesting, I like it as a main tank, better than the Minotaur, but not good enough. Like, I mean, 9 hit points, 10 hit points is too low for a main tank, unless it has Void, unless it has shields, unless it has the ability shield. You need to have, or phase, or self-heal, any of the key abilities that are going to help you stay alive. And with this amount of hit points, this thing is going to get nuked in the first round. With the 3 speed, it's going to get nuked unless the right setting is in place, where maybe there's an immunity, or divine shield, or every monster has armor, or slow monsters go first, because that would be better for a 3 monster than fast monsters go first. So I don't like that, the nicheness of it, but the kit is interesting. Flying is great with a high melee monster. That's good. There's not enough flying monsters, and every monster you have that has flying is going to help you in those earthquake. But again, that's just it. I'm listing this niche role and that niche. There's different niche things that this card can help you in. But that's not how you build a very versatile deck. You need broadly applicable tools that can fit many circumstances. And occasionally you're going to look to a card like this, but the question then the value has to be weighed against that price. Flying and Rage is so great. This thing can drop nukes on your opponent when it goes mad. The piercing makes that damage even more potent, and the Thorns is nice too, especially in the world of Amplify now, where everybody's got Amplify. So it's good. It's just not. It's not a good card to buy anywhere near this price point. Like, we're talking probably 800 bucks for a max copy, and like I just showed you, that level 7 Flesh Golem, good card with the Void, and it has self-heal, and it's got a good amount of hit points. So there's just other ways and better ways, and so even though I like this card, and the card art's really actually quite sick, and it's got an interesting kit, it's still a no because the price point. So that's number 3. Number 4, Whelp, Dragon Whelp. Another old promo card. Again, this will be one of those super rare cards, and from a collectible standpoint, yeah, it's interesting. But this one's worse than the other because it's melee focused. Oh, magic. It is magic focused. My bad. So this one's interesting because it is magic focused. But as we said with the previous one, the Jinh Low, you're talking relatively low damage and very low hit points, and so susceptibility from opportunity attackers, maybe sneak attackers also, is a very real threat. It's got flight, so that's maybe going to make you a bit more evasive, but look at the speed. It's relatively low until you get into these higher levels. And if you notice, Like this one is actually a common, which means you need 379 copies times $40. Thing's gonna cost you 15 grand before you get like a high level max copy of it. And it's only 40 for that one, by the way. 44, 48. Like this, you couldn't actually, it looks like you wouldn't be able to buy enough copies. But you could theoretically buy this one with 248 for 11 grand. So it's an interesting card, but it doesn't even have sneak. It doesn't even have opportunity. Yes, of course, it's magic and you're going to be able to bury it in the middle or the back or something like that. The thorns is kind of cool. In certain rule sets where you would have equalizer rule set would make this card really interesting. And for 3 mana, this price tag is ludicrous. You could create 3 different diamond decks for this cost. And I'm not exaggerating. That's true. I have multiple diamond accounts. And look, this one is diamond. This one's 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 diamond. They range from $5,000 down to like $2,500 per. So it's certainly possible to make a diamond deck for well under the cost of this one card. So of course it's a no. It's interesting, it's cool, it's a rarity, you might have never seen it before, but obviously we're not using that to build a better deck. And lastly, this one is kind of something you might have thought about. We've talked about it on the channel before. Lord Arianthus. It's a good card. It's a great card. Maybe for a long time it was one of the best off tanks in the game. It has no attack whatsoever, but that's not a problem because it has shield, void, magic, reflect, and thorns. That's almost the kit for a really good persevering tank. Now, if it had self-heal, that would be one level. That'd be the ultimate in my opinion. But the shield and void are the two most, and maybe now phase. Those are shield and void are the two abilities that really make this thing to stay and persist and just it won't go away. And then the heals in the back line, of course, from your support monsters are gonna really improve that. But even if you don't do a bunch of heals, remember the key about a tank isn't that it helps you win necessarily. It doesn't need to be there at the end of the game. The tank, the important role of a tank is that it be a distraction so that your backline damage dealers can do what they need to do. And so while this thing has 9 hit points at the highest levels, shield, void, magic, reflect, and thorns, it's going to be damaging attackers, whether it's magic monsters or melee monsters because of the reflections. It's got the shield and the void, which is going to diminish the input, the damage received, giving this thing time to live, even if you're not really sustaining it through heals. Even though it doesn't have scavenge, even though, you know, there are lots of things these days like poison and whatnot, which will take this thing down slowly. The problem for your opponent is it doesn't go down easy. Unlike the Chromatic Dragon, unlike that Minotaur, it's like this thing is resilient. And so this card I get. This card I really get. I think it makes sense to own this card. It's really good, but it's on the list because, you know, if you've been around with the channel, you know why it's on the list. It's on the list because it doesn't match up to its common equivalent, which is far, far cheaper. Here he is, the Onyx Sentinel. This card is going to cost $8 times 46. $360 for this card. And $1,000 for the Onyx Sentinel. Or I mean for the Lord Arianthus. You can get a max copy right there for 1,000 and change. And there's another max copy for 1,000 and change. So another one. So, or you can pay a third of the value and you can have almost the exact same kit. The Onyx Sentinel, which beside it actually. Like this. Can't be able to see that window. My bad. Okay. So the Onyx Sentinel has shield, Void, Thorns, and Return Fire. Whereas this one has Shield, Void, Magic Reflect, and Thorns. The Return Fire is the only difference with the Onyx Sentinel, whereas the Arianthus has the Magic Reflect. Magic Reflect is great. I like it. I want it. I wish I had it on my Onyx Sentinel. But the Onyx Sentinel is the same amount of mana cost. The same amount of hit points, almost. It has one less hit point. Even at the highest levels, the Lord A has 9 and Onyx Sentinel has 8. Are you telling me that's worth $700? It isn't. So Lord Arianthus, although it's an amazing card, is the number 5 card on the list of cards that I think are super overrated, that I think have no reason being purchased today, that I think you should never touch and have no reason to be exploring. They're great cards in some ways, but when you weigh that value versus cost, they're a total easy pass, hard pass. And Lord A is, you know, some people are going to think, man, that card's awesome. Why would you say that? But it has nothing to do with the awesomeness. It has everything to do with the comparative value. So it's like, you can replace that kit for less, then you're wise to stretch your dollar by using the alternative that is far more frugal. And that's obviously Onyx Sentinel, which is clearly, you know, nearly a duplicate of the Lord Arianthus. And so that's the top 5 for me of cards that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And I hope you understand why. It has nothing to do with their abilities being undesirable in many ways, with perhaps the sole exception of the Minotaur. I like each of these cards. Just I wouldn't want them for the price point, and I don't really think they're gonna change my ability to win in a dramatic way. Particularly when that increased opportunity toward victory is weighed by the dollar value of the card. You see what I mean? It's like, yeah, they might help, but it's going to be disproportionate. It's going to lack. It's not going to. The amount that they improve your deck is not going to satisfy the cost that you have to pay to get it. So I hope that was interesting. I'm going to do one also like this on the wild cards. That'll be a bit different because, as you know, many of the modern cards are, you know, far more reasonably priced. With the exception of some of the summoners. But the funny thing about that is I'm not sure I would discount, for instance, Kitty or Jotun. I might say for those ones, $6,000 is worth it. We'll talk about that in another video. If that sounds interesting, like and subscribe, stick around, stay tuned, drop me a comment on what cards you think would be overrated. What are your 5 cards you think you would never touch? And maybe it has to do with cost, or maybe it has to do with kit.